After figuring out that the powers that shouldn't be running this world have managed to convince us that we're all living on a giant spinning ball flying through an infinite vacuum, as well as faking exploration of the near surroundings within it just to maintain the illusion of the whole construct, something so trivial as hiding the existence of a whole species or a number of closely related species shouldn't come as such a shock. Even if these species happen to be pre-human hominids, often giant in stature, living in the remote forests of all continents except Antarctica. Yet, coming to this conclusion, as I have over the last 6 months or so, has come as quite a shock, and raises some even more shocking questions. You'll probably be shocked yourself to find out that the question of how it's been covered up for so long carries only minimal shock value when compared to the bigger questions the existence of the Sasquatch and all its international cousins will raise. But before we get to the big questions, first I'm going to have to prove to you that these things actually do exist. That's what this video is going to focus on. Most people can't even get past the question of how are they covering up something so big, so I'm going to address that quickly. Number one, through mainstream media we've been programmed into dealing with witnesses of these creatures, and there are plenty, with an incredibly powerful deterrent. As touched on by my previous video, ridicule. Because, and this leads into number two, mainstream media has never treated the subject seriously, with any shows dealing with it remaining inconclusive or intentionally treating the subject with ridicule to the point that, number three, scientists won't touch the topic. And any mavericks who do get close to the truth are shut down by, number four, the clandestine agencies hired to keep it covered up, which is made easier by number five, the elusive nature of the creatures themselves. They evidently have spent a lot of time and effort hiding themselves from humans for whatever reason, and are pretty good at it. These things are the masters of stealth. Most of the people that see these things are the types who spend a lot of time in and around their habitats. And if you're thinking it's only ignorant hillbillies that see these things, get a grip. These people are often hunters and spend a lot of their time out in the bush, and are by no means ignorant. And they know the difference between a bear and a giant ape, for God's sake. But it seems these days, as our cities expand into what was once the territory of the Sasquatch, there's actually easy pickings for these creatures, and they seem to be living right alongside suburban areas these days. From what I can tell, their population is booming, so it seems unlikely to me that this cover-up can last too much longer. I have a feeling things are going to get pretty interesting in regard to these creatures. But first things first, I have to prove to you that these things are actually real. So I'm going to show you the peer-reviewed science proving the existence of these creatures and their scheduling as an animal in the ZooBank database. Here's some excerpts of interviews of Rob Kreider of Kreider Exploration, who gathered some of the DNA evidence for the Sasquatch Genome Project, which was undertaken by Melba Ketchum and her team, who have subsequently had their names dragged through the mud in typical fashion of the gatekeepers of dogmatic scientism.
Science is a discovery process. You cannot discover what you know. So the moment you think you know, you've already limited what you're going to discover. Is that not true? So when we say, oh, everything out there in the woods, that's known. And if it was new, we'd hear about it. Would you? Would you? Is there a vested interest anyone has to disclose this information to you? When the genetics come back partially human, and it does this on 300 genomes, and it's published and accepted in ZooBank Gen Archive. So, in other words, the local flora and fauna, all the animals on the planet are in these archives. There's GenBank and there's ZooBank. ZooBank has accepted and published this under the name Homo sapiens cognatus, your blood relative. Now there's the problem. What happens if you have a bunch of 10-foot kind of human things running around, living where they want, doing what they want, eating what they want? They don't have to worry about boundaries, lines. Now, isn't that the true definition of human rights? Now, that brings into reflection, what about us, for one? That's an aspect nobody wants to go there. The other thing is, the lid's been kept on it since the early 50s. The science is done by the FBI, released science in the early 70s. It was listed in local flora and fauna. It was listed by the Army Corps of Engineers to let people know what animals they may encounter in the wild up until 1975. So with all this going against us, with all this happening, how in the world would you ever know? How would you ever know? It's always left in an essence of maybe, and almost always on the side of no way. Now, I've been offered 5 television shows. Have you seen me on TV? No. It's because I won't say what the script says. We actually do this for a living. This was being filmed for Animal Planet. I brought a TV crew in to a place within 200 foot of a large female, and when she grunted at us, all the film crew ran. They left. They want a show that's scripted, that you say what they want, that offers the time to the skeptical viewpoint as well, even if it's against physical evidence. Physical evidence speaks for itself. There's no debate. But that's what they want. They want the question left open. They want it to be a myth. If you don't look and actively search and dig through the absolute mountains, and I'm not kidding you, of worthless information to get to the truth, unless you do that, you're not going to know. Because they're not going to just outright tell you. Now that's kind of a shame. Because it's got a large impact, a socio-religious impact, socio-economic impact. Hasn't anyone in academia known? What about the Forest Service? The Bureau of Land Management? Don't they know? If these things exist and it's already listed and it's classified and it's in ZooBank's database, how do they not know? Okay, it raises 2 questions. One of incompetency, right? Or one that they're not telling us the truth. And you don't want people to start wondering any of this stuff and start to lose confidence in any of these agencies or any of these authorities. That's a big deal, because with the existence of a real creature comes the potential for real danger to the people that are in its environment. Any large creature often whacks a smaller creature at one point or another. This has actually occurred. As well, you're not going to read about these things unless you really did. And some of these you have to go right into FBI investigations to find out information. Why is the FBI involved? But they only get involved in humans. They should never be involved in an animal attack. Yet we see these things. This is an indicator to you that something's going on that's not correct. And it's got a real potential danger for the public in certain areas, not everywhere. And what we're finding out about the species is, as a whole, they're not dangerous or aggressive. But they certainly can be. I've been injured on 2 occasions. One of them I have on video. I know that a cow didn't sneak up on me and videoed and throw a rock at 50 miles an hour. These things possess a threat, even if they're not trying to actually hurt you. Humans are fragile creatures. Now, we've had some episodes in the Sandias. This is where it got pretty weird. Because when you start to put 2 and 2 together, which is what no one wants anyone to do, trust me, you begin to realize, wow, they're not only occupying some of the more remote or rugged regions of our state, but hey, everything that goes with an animal in the natural order exists with this creature, which means, it could be upset one day. It could have being overprotective of its offspring. It could be in the rut or feeling a pheromonic reaction, and as well be defensive or aggressive. Now, as long as everyone's saying it doesn't exist, well, certainly there's no danger, is there? So get on out there on the woods and trails and have yourself a good time until something happens. And then when it does, no one's complaining and says, what might have done that? Because then what? A simple economic impact is California state parks. They receive over $80 million a year in admission fees alone. Now, we all know the admission fee when you go to a state park, that's nothing. That's the cheapest expenditure, is it not? But we're talking $80 million alone, just in admission fees, just in state parks. It's not monument land, state land, BLM land, or anything else. So we're talking, relative speaking, tens of billions of dollars a year, if not far more. That's how we figured groceries and gas and travel and everything else. Now, the propensity for losing that type of revenue is enough by itself. But what about the liability? What about 30 years of saying, oh no, it's cool, go in the woods? And all the relatives that have either lost people that come up missing, or there has been many, many cases of maulings by something unreal that rips people apart. What about when all that comes back and the family says, wow, I wonder if that's what that was? Didn't you guys know about it? Well, there's only two answers then, isn't there? There's the one, no, we didn't know, back to incompetent. Or, well, we knew, but we didn't have the means to tell you because maybe it wasn't accepted. Well, that's right back to the other part now, isn't it? So, between all this gruff, there's a reality flowing through it. And we're bumping the edge of what can be held back in secrecy now. We've gained enough understanding of the species now to not only predict their behavior, but often even their location, which has enabled us to go in and do things like collect hair.
What you've got is, a physical hair that's about the size of a horse mane hair and wavy. And it's about 3 or 4 inches long. And it's got a natural end on it. It's never been cut, never been dyed. When you look at it under the microscope by a forensic hair analyst that does both human and animal, and he had a whole lot of knowns of North American animals to compare it to.
Okay, so those who say, well, gosh, it looks to me like it's all human. There's nothing novel about it.
Well, that was fine until we went into the nuclear testing,
right?
The whole genomes and what have you, and the different places on the DNA that we looked at for the first time. And then we found all this really strange sequence that's just not in GenBank. I mean, there'll be bits of human sequence in it, but then there'll be a lot of novel sequence, different sequence in there that's not ever been, One thing about it, at least we could use GenBank to blast with or to check the sequences against what's in GenBank without uploading them. So we were able to do that, and we have trees to that effect. A lot of the supplementary data is trees that were generated directly on GenBank.
Just to reiterate, you can weed out an animal. It's not a possum. It's not a bear. I mean, the labs you're sending it to, they can tell right away, right?
Oh, absolutely. Because the thing is, when you sequence the mitochondrial DNA, that's what forensic scientists use for a species test. Is you have these universal primers that'll work on everything, and you sequence your DNA from them, and it's going to tell you what species you got.
This is some of the information on the Melba Ketchum study and focus. And she's one of the most accredited geneticists on the planet. She had her own genetic company. She's extremely accredited. She's highly, highly intuitive with the work she does. She's a pioneer in the works of genetics. She worked with the Genome Project and some other things, doing the first genomic study of horses and dogs. And her genomic results were what were used to value racehorses in the millions of dollars. She's also worked on forensic cases, and she's had things tried based on her opinions and her ideas and her information. Now, what's interesting is, as I said, you can take someone of this caliber, a pioneer in genetics, and they say the word Bigfoot, and they're automatically blacklisted, they're out the door. Now, she mapped, in this study alone, which was called the Sasquatch Genome Project, backed by a man named Erickson, they mapped the complete genomes on over 140 subjects. And I'm sure we all remember the Human Genome Project. Big deal to map the human genome. She's mapped 100 Sasquatch's genome.
We knew we had good, clean DNA. We went forward after screening, and we started outsourcing because I knew there would be a problem if just 1 or 2 labs did this. So we sent these samples out. Nobody knew what they were. I shopped around and found out who had the best reputations. They were accredited labs. They were major university labs. There were state crime labs. We sent the samples to Family Tree DNA. They specialize in mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA, I might offer, is maternally related. It comes from your mother only, whereas your nuclear DNA comes from your mother and your father. We got 20 whole genomes, 10 partial genomes, and the rest of the samples we just screened because you get that many that are running the same, that pretty well tells the story. And once we got those results, we knew that they didn't exactly look human, so we decided to go after the nuclear DNA. We started getting really strange results. Normally, when you run a particular primer pair, and we tried to do as many universal primers as we could, as well as human and ape-specific primers. You've seen on TV where they have gels with bands on it, and they all are just running across at the same level. Well, that's what you get. Well, we didn't get that at all. We got weird-looking bands that were all different sizes, yet we had already species identified them as human. And so this was bizarre, and I didn't tell them, once again, what they had. So I get this email from one of the PhDs at the lab we outsource nuclear testing to. We also let them do some mito testing to back up the other mito. And she said, we got this really weird fragment. It's not as long as it should be. It's like 490-something bases, and we were supposed to get 500 and some odd bases. And a base pair is just the building block of DNA, and the length of it is in base pairs. So with that said, it was a shorter one, and she blasted it in GenBank. Now, GenBank is a sequence depository that all the scientists, they put their sequences in, and then you can go compare your unknown sequence to it. Well, she blasted it, and it didn't come out matching anything that's ever been put in GenBank out of millions of sequences. And so she writes in this email, she says, what did you send me? We don't know what this is. Have you discovered a new species? I have that in an email. And so we finally had to tell them what they were testing. None of them liked it. We had one threaten us if we used their name, we couldn't use it. I take it back. Family Tree was very much the nicest one about it. Texas A&M did it. They saw the same strangeness that the other university did. They backed up the results I wasn't able to use the name of.
That's how they finally ended up getting ZooBank to accept it. When it was to go around and publish for peer review, 2 solid years it was turned down because it stated what it was for. So that was rude. So then all of a sudden a bunch of labs picked it up. Scientists looked at it and said absolutely and signed off on it until they found what it was for. Then they demanded that retracted. Well, then a new science journal that had come out just a couple years previous decided we'll take a look at it. And they did. And when they did, they found it to be not only competent, but they found they could repeat it. And they found it to be viable. And they said, yes, we'll absolutely publish this. It's good work. Until their legal department stepped in. Their lawyers said, you will not publish this. This was an attorney making a decision on what you know exists in this world. A single man in a legal department, not a science journal. So when you think the peer review process is solely based on judgment, on repetition, on science, and it goes through the avenues, it's not. It's just as much on everything from ego and fear as it is economic reasons, which is why the legal department did not want the science journal to publish it. So the Erickson Group came up with enough money, and they bought the journal. Now they're accused they self-published because they own the journal that published the paper. The fact is, they have the full signatories. It was being published. It was approved before they bought the journal. But you see how this gets turned around. So now, even though it has been peer-reviewed and published, accepted by ZooBank into the genomic list of the flora and fauna, we're still in here debating the existence of a creature that is listed in ZooBank to have a genetic code, which means it's a creature. It's been classified.